Nice. Okay, so let's start by a little review of our last class. Uh, in our last class, we talked a little bit about the difference between Saint Thomas Aquinas's thought and Saint Augustine thought, mainly when it comes to let's say uh, people inspired in Saint Augustine, right? Remember that there is this more modern way of seeing Thomas Aquinas as opposed to Saint Augustine, but of course this is a much more let's say naive way of seeing it, a little bit like what happens when they oppose uh, um, Plato and Aristotle, right? There are theories putting like Plato as in the opposite team of Aristotle, as if one is fighting the other, and that would make a lot of sense because, Saint Augustine would be on the side of Plato, and Thomas Aquinas would be on the side of Aristotle. But if we understand a little bit deeper both pairs of thinkers, we will see that we are talking about two perspectives of the same thing, you know? So there are scholars who find a way to see Aristotle as somebody continuing Plato's philosophy, but from another perspective, but it's still the same perspective. Also, it's very important to say that, as we said last class, um, Thomas Aquinas mentions Saint Augustine all the time. You know, so the idea of Thomas Aquinas is to use tradition as much as he can. So we have to remember that tradition is something extremely important in a way that he's going to organize tradition. And of course, he's not just going to compile, he's not a compiler of tradition, but he's going to organize tradition and contribute with original thought as well, right? We cannot forget now, having a little digression here, we cannot forget that, for example, Homer, right? The great Homer, the writer of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Well, he was in the end of a big tradition and in the beginning of another big tradition. What do I mean by that? Homer compiled in two books the myths that were kind of the folklore in religion. In Greek culture, it's difficult to differentiate those things. So it was the kind of folklore, religion, and common culture of Greece at that time, right? But we have to be careful when we discover that Homer was like that. There have been some people that have even suggested that, well, so Homer had nothing original, right? Because he was just reusing all the tradition. But I think here we have the genius of Homer, and of course the genius of Thomas Aquinas as well. So the idea is, one thing is to have hundreds, millions of little stories that sometimes don't have depth, a lot of times contradict each other. The other thing is to get all of this common culture and make it uh, something that works together. So articulate the parts. We have to remember as well something I mentioned before, but I will be mentioning over and over again, this idea that this conception that a good author is an original author, right? So you are great if you are, if nobody has ever thought what you have thought, this is a very modern way of thinking, right? We could say that with romanticism it became stronger. Well, Homer, for example, would never care if he was being original or not. He would care if his work would be good or not. It doesn't matter if he would copy. That's not the point. The point is, I will either. Okay, so then maybe somebody would ask, okay, so if you live in a time like that and if you think like that, you're just going to copy other people's work and then you're going to call yourself artist. But of course, the idea is if the new work I have done is uh, I let's say is um lower and the same as my inspiration, then there's no reason why I should write. I should just tell people to write what came before me, right? But if what I write takes the art, the culture to a higher level or to another perspective, then I should write, right? We have to remember that. We have to remember that this is so true in the Roman culture that for I don't know for a lot of years in the beginning of the Roman culture, culture in Rome was translation of Greek literature. Right? So, for example, the first comedies in Rome, they were just what did uh, the writer of the comedy would do? He would compile, he would get 3 or 4 Greek comedies, get parts of those Greek comedies, and put them together. And that was it. That was his work. Of course, in that case, we have an example of something that maybe it was too much of copying, but that was the beginning of literature. With that, you start getting, let's say, energy up to the point you are going to go higher, right? So for Thomas Aquinas, it doesn't make any sense to say that he obeys too much the earlier thinkers. He would say, "Great, right? This is exactly what I want to do. I want to respect tradition." So it's as if when he's writing, uh, it's by let's say it's a side effect his original thought, right? As we have to remember again that the great painters before gluing a banana to the wall of the museum, right? Before that, uh, the great painters, they would spend years traveling to Italy, traveling to other places, and working like a helper to a great painter. So you would try to get his way of painting. There wasn't this thing of, oh, I have to find my way of painting. There wasn't this thing. Of course, that is not to say that they shouldn't find their way of painting, but as if it's a side effect. You start practicing and you practice even more, and then you practice even more, and you copy and you repeat and you copy again. And there will be a moment that you have that 1% different, and that 1% will be your genius, right? Not making everything new. So we have to keep that in mind. Well, I will finish this section